Check, check, check. Hello Twitch, hello YouTube. I'm Gabey Baby. Tonight we're going to be doing a quiet read. I'm going to be reading a few passages from Mindfulness and Meditation by Headspace. Let me shine a quick light so you can see. So this book has a lot of great passages on meditation and mindfulness. And so tonight I'm going to be sharing a few passages from it. Here we go. Meditation and Mindfulness. It's by Headspace. Thank you so much for joining me. Before we get started, I'm going to be pouring a glass of wine and opening up this bottle. And if you want to join me and share a glass, go right ahead. Also, before we start, I invite you to find a comfortable place to sit or lie down and relax, and take a few deep breaths before we get started, so you can really feel in a good headspace and feel comfortable. So find a place to relax, and before we start, close your eyes, and let's take a few deep breaths. We're going to go inhale for 4 seconds. We're going to hold for 4 seconds. Then we're going to exhale for 4 seconds, and then hold for 4 seconds. So let's begin. Inhale. Hold. 2. Exhale. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. Now that you've found a comfortable place to relax, let's get started. The wine I'm drinking tonight is called Ménage à Trois. Sorry, my lighting situation isn't that great. I need to get better lights, and the focus on the camera is a little strange. I need to work with that. But nonetheless, we're going to have a fun night of reading tonight, and hopefully these passages feel good in your brain and help you relax, feel calm, and maybe get some sleep. So without further ado, we're going to be opening up the bottle. Here we go. Let's get started with a few of our readings for today. Again, this book is Mindfulness and Meditation. Meditation and Mindfulness by Andy Buddhicome from Headspace. We're going to start with the intro. we start, find a comfortable place to relax. Lie down, take a deep breath, close your eyes. Let's get started. It was already well past midnight. I sat on top of the wall and looked down. The tall pine trees from inside the grounds gave me plenty of cover in the darkness. Sorry, that was my alarm. Yet I couldn't resist the urge to look back one time to see if I'd been followed. How had it come to this? I looked down again. It was just over 12 feet to the pavement. It may not sound that high, but crouching in a flimsy pair of sandals and my night clothes, the thought of jumping made me wince. What was I thinking wearing sandals? I tucked them into my trouser bottoms as I crept through the monastery, trying not to wake any of the other monks. I'd gone to the monastery to contemplate life, and yet here I was scaling its walls and contemplating my sandals as I prepared to jump back into the world. It was never meant to be this way. I trained as a Buddhist monk before and in much more challenging environments, but other monasteries had included a warmth, a kind of caring approach to what can only be described as a challenging yet very fulfilling way of life. This one had felt different though. It was a Buddhist monastery like no other, locked in day and night, surrounded by high stone walls and with no way of contacting anyone out the outside. At times, it had felt more like a prison. I had no one to blame but myself, of course. After all, I'd gone there of my own free will. It's just that traditionally monasticism is a little different from the mafia. It's not usually the case that once you become a monk, that's it for life, with no way out. In fact, on the contrary, Buddhist monasteries are known and respected for their tolerance and compassion. So how I'd ended up leaving one over a 12-foot wall to get away from one was a mystery, really. It had all started a few years earlier when I made the decision to pack up and head off to Asia to become a monk. I was at university at the time, studying sports science. It may sound like a dramatic change in lifestyle, but it felt like one of the easiest decisions I've ever made. Understandably, my friends and family were slightly more apprehensive than I was, perhaps wondering if I'd finally lost my mind, but all of them were nonetheless supportive. It was a different story at university, however. On hearing the news of my year, suggested that a trip to see the doctor for some Prozac might be a more sensible option. As well meaning as he might have been, I couldn't help thinking he was missing the point. Did he really think I was going to find the type of happiness and fulfillment I was after in a bottle of prescription medicine? As I walked out the door to his office, he said, "Andy, you'll regret this decision for your life. As it turns out, it happens to be one of the best decisions I ever made." That was a little excerpt from the introduction of the book. I'm going to skip ahead to some of the actual passages in the book that speak a little bit more on meditation and mindfulness. It's a pretty long introduction. It goes over 20 pages. So I'm just looking for a great starting point in the book. So now we're going to be reading a passage from a section called The Approach. This passage is entitled Meditation and Thoughts. When I set off for my very first monastery, I was convinced that meditation was all about stopping thoughts. I'd heard about this quiet, empty mind, which could supposedly be achieved through meditation, and I was desperate to taste it. Sure, I'd had a glimpse or two over the years, but I imagined it as something never-ending, a bubble in which there was nothing but space, and through which nothing unpleasant could enter. I imagined it as a place that was free from thoughts and feelings. I'm not sure how I ever imagined it was possible to live without thoughts or feelings, but this is how I approached meditation from the beginning. But trying to create this bubble, to achieve this state of mind which I'd assumed I'd needed to reach to be meditating properly, is probably one of the most common misconceptions about meditation. I received some excellent instruction during this time, but the style in which it was delivered only served to reinforce many of the erroneous ideas I'd had about it. Each day, I'd visit the teacher and explain how my meditation was going, and how there was all these thoughts racing through my mind that I couldn't stop no matter what I tried. And each day he'd tell me to be more vigilant, to try harder, to catch the thoughts the moment they arose in the mind. In no time, I became a nervous wreck. I'd sit on guard hour after hour. It felt like the mental equivalent of the whack-a-mole game you'd find at a fair, constantly waiting for the next thought to arrive so that I could jump on it and extinguish it. With 18 hours of meditation every day and just 3 hours or so for sleep, it wasn't long before I'd exhausted myself completely. I'd sit there in the temple, straining to achieve something, anything, but with every extra ounce of effort, I moved further away from that which I was seeking. The other monks from the local area looked perfectly relaxed. In fact, there were a few who seemed to regularly nod off. Now, while that's obviously not the purpose of meditation, when you're forcing it as much as I was, the idea of sleep was positively dreamy. After a little while, my teacher realized that I was putting in too much effort and instructed me to try less. But by this stage, I was putting too much effort into everything, even into trying less. This struggle went on for some time until I was fortunate enough to meet a teacher who seemed to have a natural gift for storytelling, for explaining things in a way I could easily understand. What he said to me came as quite a shock, because his description of meditation was radically different to what I imagined. He began by asking me to imagine I was sitting on the side of a very busy road with a blindfold around my head. Now, he said, maybe you can hear the background noise, the cars whizzing by, but you can't see them because you have your eyes covered, right? I imagined myself sitting on the grass verge of a motorway and nodded in agreement. So, he went on, before you start to meditate, it can feel a bit like this, because all of the background noise in the mind, all the thoughts, it means that even when you sit down to relax or go to bed at night, it still feels as though this noise continues, yes? It was hard to argue with this, because it did indeed feel as though there was always a certain amount of background noise or restlessness in my mind, even when I was not consciously aware of the individual thoughts. Now imagine taking the blindfold off, he continued. For the first time, you see the road, your mind, clearly. You see the cars racing by, the different colors, shapes, and sizes. Maybe sometimes you're attracted by the sound of the cars. At other times, more interested in their appearance. But this is what it's like when you first take off the blindfold. He started laughing to himself. You know, he said, sometimes it's at this point that people learning meditation say some very funny things. They start to blame their thoughts and feelings on the meditation. Can you believe it? He asked mockingly. They come and say, oops, I lost my spot. Can you believe it? He asked mockingly. They come and see me and say, I don't know what's happening. Where are all these thoughts coming from? I never usually think this much. It must be the meditation making me think this all the time. As if the meditation is somehow making their situation worse. His laughter trailed off as he picked up the thread of his explanation. So the first thing to get straight is that meditation does not make you think. All it does is shine a big bright light on your mind so that you can see it more clearly. This bright light is awareness. You may not like what you see when you switch the light on, but it's a clear and accurate reflection of how your mind behaves on a daily basis. I sat there and considered his words. He was definitely right. About one thing, I'd been blaming meditation for the state of my mind ever since I started. I couldn't believe that my mind was really like that all the time, or at least I didn't want to believe it was. I wondered if perhaps I was beyond help altogether, that no amount of meditation was going to help. It turns out that this is a surprisingly common feeling though, so be assured if you feel this way too. My teacher seemed to sense where I was going and interrupted my thoughts. This is how the mind looks to begin with, he said. Softly, not just in your mind, but everybody's. That's why training is so important. When you see the mind in this confused state, it's very difficult to know what to do about it. For some people, it's difficult not to panic. Sometimes, people try to stop the thoughts through force. At other times, they try to ignore them, to think about something else instead. Or if the thoughts are very interesting, then they might try to encourage them and get involved in them. But all these tactics are just ways of trying to avoid the reality of what is. If you think back to the busy road, it's no different from getting up from the side of the road, running among the cars and trying to control the traffic. He paused for a moment. This is quite a risky strategy, he said, laughing again. Sound familiar? Once again, he was right. That's exactly what I've been doing, and not just in my meditation. It summed up my life in general. I'd been trying to control everything. Seeing the chaos of my mind when I sat to meditate had simply triggered the habitual tendency to jump in and take charge, to sort everything out. When that hadn't worked, I just ramped up the effort. But then that's where we thought we were young, isn't it? Must try harder. So I'd just keep trying harder. But it turns out no amount of force will result in a feeling of calm. My teacher continued by making a suggestion. Here's an idea. Rather than running around in the traffic trying to control everything, why not try starting where you are for a moment? What happens then? What happens when you stay on the side of the road and just watch as the traffic goes past? Maybe it's rush hour and the road's full of cars. Or maybe it's the middle of the night and there are very few cars at all. It doesn't really matter which it is. The point is to get used to holding your seat on the side of the road and just watching traffic go by. I found the idea of watching and the thoughts go by quite easy to imagine, and for once, I was actually in a hurry to get back to my meditation cushion. When you start to approach your meditation in this way, you'll notice that your perspective changes, he says. In stepping back from the thoughts and feelings, there will be an increased sense of space. It might feel as if you're simply an observer, watching the thoughts, the traffic go by. Sometimes you might forget, he said, smiling knowingly. And before you know it, you'll find yourself running down the road after a fancy-looking car. This is what happens when you experience a pleasant thought. You see it, get caught up in it, and end up chasing after the thought. He was now laughing loudly as he imagined me chasing the cars. But then all of a sudden, you'll realize what you're doing, and in that moment, you'll have the opportunity to return to your seat at the side of the road. At other times, you might see some traffic coming that you don't like the look of. Maybe it's an old rusty car, an unpleasant thought, and you'll no doubt rush into the traffic to try and stop it. You might try to resist this feeling or thought for quite some time before you realize that you're back in the road again. But the moment you do, in that moment, you have the opportunity to take up your position on the side of the road again. He continued, now speaking more deliberately. Over time, this will get easier. You won't want to run out into the road quite so often, and you'll find it easier and easier to just sit and watch the thoughts go by. This is the process of meditation. We're going to take a pause for a big, deep breath. Hold. Exhale. In for 4. Hold. Exhale. Thank you again for joining me tonight on this quiet read. It's been nice, relaxing, and calm. I'm going to quickly share a picture of my setup so that my Instagram followers can join if they like. And I hope the fireplace is helping you relax as well. In just a moment, we're going to be returning to the reading and the passage in the Mindfulness book. If you are enjoying this video, please give it a thumbs up, click the like button, leave a comment, let me know what you think. I'd love to hear feedback on my stream. Let's get back to it. It's worth taking some time to reflect on this analogy, and as I sat there, I considered what he said. It all made so much sense, at least theoretically, but there were a couple of points that didn't feel right. If I was just sitting there as an observer to the thoughts, then who was doing the thinking? Surely I can't be doing both at the same time. Your thoughts are autonomous, he explained. Of course, if you want to think about something, you can. You have that ability to reflect, to remember, or to project into the future and imagine how things might be. But what about the thoughts that just pop into your mind when you sit to meditate, or when you're walking down the street, or sitting at your desk trying to read a book? What about those thoughts? You didn't bring those thoughts to mind, did you? They came to mind. One minute you're reading a book, and the next the thought of an old friend pops into your mind. You haven't thought of this friend for a long time, and you make no conscious effort to bring him to mind, and yet all of a sudden, there he is. This was definitely something I experienced a lot. I don't know if it's something that ever happens to you, but I'd often start reading a page of a book, only to reach the end, and realize that not a word had gone in. Inevitably, somewhere along the way, a thought had popped up and I'd become distracted, often without even being aware of it. So, he continued, these thoughts that we try so hard to suppress, to get away from, or to stop altogether, are pretty much just popping up whenever they feel like it, right? We like to think we control our minds, control the flow of thought. But if it was possible to do that, then you wouldn't have traveled halfway around the world for my advice. He pointed at me, playfully laughing. In fact, if it were possible to control your thoughts, then you'd never have any reason to get stressed at all. You'd simply block out all the unpleasant thoughts and live peacefully with all your happy thoughts. I couldn't believe how obvious it sounded when he explained it like that. It was almost as if I already knew it at some level, but had somehow forgotten to apply this to the idea of my life. But what about productive thoughts? I asked. What about creative thoughts? Ones that are necessary to solve problems. I'm not saying that all thinking is bad, he said. We need the ability to think in order to live. But it's the nature of mind to think in the same way that the road was built for cars to journey on. Excuse me, I had a quick sneeze there. In the same way that the road was built for cars to journey on, so the mind exists to experience thoughts and feelings. So don't make the mistake of thinking that all thoughts are bad. They're not. We just need to know how to relate to them. When you need to ask yourself, he continued, is how much of your thinking was helpful and productive, and how much is unhelpful or unproductive? Only you know the answer to that. I'm assuming that because you've come all this way to see me, your thinking causes problems at times, that maybe some of it is not so helpful. There was no arguing with that. A great many of my thoughts fell into the unhelpful and unproductive category. If you're worried about losing these creative thoughts, he gestured somewhat dismissively, then where do you think they come from in the first place? Do those moments of inspiration come from cold, rational thinking, or do they arise from the stillness and spaciousness of the mind? When the mind is always busy, there's no room for these thoughts to arise. So by training your mind, you'll actually make more space for these creative thoughts to arise. The point is, don't be a slave to your mind. If you want to direct your mind and use it well, then good. But what use is the mind if it's all over the place, with no direction of sense, with no sense of direction or stability? Having thanked my teacher for his time, I returned to my room and mull over all we'd discussed. Every point seemed to be as important as the next. For me, it was a radically different way of approaching meditation, and I suspect it may well be for you too. But in that one short meeting, I'd learned that meditation, within a mindful context, was not about stopping thoughts and controlling the mind. It was a process of giving up control, of stepping back, learning how to focus the attention in a passive way, while simply resting the mind in its own natural awareness. My teacher had explained how it was a skill, an art, knowing how to step back and how not to get continually sucked into the realm of endless, unproductive, and often stressful thinking. I'd learned how the thoughts were autonomous, and how no amount of force could prevent them from arising. Over the next few weeks, I became increasingly enthusiastic about my meditation. This new way of approaching the same technique had been a revelation. It seemed to make a difference the very first time I tried it. Of course, sometimes I forget and slip back into my old habits, but slowly these new ideas started to take root. At times, the mind continued to be very busy, just as my teacher had promised, but on other occasions, it became very, very quiet. It was as if the volume of cars on the road had decreased to such an extent that I could now see the individual cars a lot more clearly. Not only that, but the space between these cars was now longer, wider, bigger. In fact, sometimes there appeared to be no cars at all. And it was then that I finally understood the confusion I'd experienced in learning meditation. Having heard about these moments of no thought or empty space, I'd always assumed that it was doing something I had to do. As it turns out, though, it is in not doing that these moments arise. It is stepping back and allowing the mind to unwind in its own time and its own way that you will find a genuine sense of headspace. I really enjoyed that passage about the road, and it's a great analogy. It's a great mental image of how to improve your meditation. Put yourself on the side of the road, imagine the cars driving by. This next passage is entitled "The Blue Sky." So how do you not do something while engaging in an exercise that isn't designed to do something? Despite the advice I received, this was an idea I still struggled with from time to time. Sure, sitting on the side of the road was fine for a little while, but before long, I found myself impatiently waiting for more progress. It's hard to believe that a sense of calm was not enough to satisfy me, but I wanted more. I wanted insight. Because although the thoughts had started to settle down, I was still left with a lot of the usual emotional stuff. Whether it was feeling frustrated, worried, or doubtful, These emotions seemed to cloud my experience of meditation time and time again. I also found it hard to believe that such a passive approach was really going to lead to any long-lasting change. It was one thing to experience a sense of calm in the monastery, but quite another to imagine this working among the chaos of everyday life. A good few months passed before I had the opportunity to see the senior teacher in the monastery again. But when I did, I asked if he could help me out with what was becoming an increasingly big obstacle for me. "Imagine a clear blue sky," he began. "Feels nice, yes? It's very hard to feel down when the sky's blue like that." He paused, as if to appreciate the space this image brought to the mind. "Now imagine that your mind is like this blue sky. I'm not talking about all the thoughts, confusion, and craziness," he said, chuckling. "I'm talking about the underlying essence of mind, the natural state." I took a moment to think about it. Imagining a clear blue sky was one thing, but imagining that it somehow represented my own mind was quite another. There was nothing clear about my mind back then. It was just full of thoughts and confusing emotions. "It doesn't matter whether this is your experience right now," he said. "Simply imagine for a moment that this is how things are. In fact, think back to the last time you felt very happy and relaxed, and it's probably not so very difficult to imagine." He was right. When I thought about a happy time in my life at the same moment, it was actually very easy to imagine. Try it for yourself right now. "Okay," he said. "Now imagine a very cloudy day. No blue sky at all. Just big, dark, heavy clouds." He said each word very slowly as if to emphasize the point. "How does that make you feel?" he asked, still smiling. "Not so good, right? Now imagine those clouds are the thoughts in your mind, how sometimes they're fluffy and white and appear quite friendly, whereas at the other times they appear dark and heavy. The color of the clouds simply reflects your feelings or mood at the time." It was true. When I had lots of friendly thoughts racing around, the fluffy white clouds, I wasn't that bothered about having a busy mind. Unless I was trying to meditate, that is, and then I'd struggle with them sometimes. But when the thoughts were difficult, the heavy dark clouds, I started to feel really uncomfortable. But it was the next bit of his story that really resonated and that I hope will stay with you too for a long time to come. "In order to get to this monastery, you must have flown in a plane," he asked, knowing full well what the answer would be. I agreed. "Was it cloudy when you left?" he asked. "It's always cloudy in England," I replied, smiling. "Well then," he said, "you'll know that if you get in a plane and fly up through the clouds, there's nothing but blue sky on the other side, even when it appears as though there's nothing but big, dark, heavy clouds. There's always blue sky there." There was no denying it. I'd flown a lot over the years, and he was right. "So," he said, shrugging his shoulders, "the sky is always blue." He chuckled to himself, as though everything I ever needed to know was in that one sentence. And in a way, it was. I returned to my room and thought about the significance of what I'd heard. As a concept, I got it. The sky is always blue. The clouds are our thoughts, and when the mind is very busy with all these thoughts, the blue sky is temporarily obscured. In my own case, the mind had been so busy with thoughts and for such a long time that I'd almost forgotten what the blue sky looked like. But it was more than that. It was this idea that the underlying essence of the mind, like the blue sky, is unchanging, no matter how we feel. When we're in a bad mood or feeling rough for some reason, then the cloud is simply more obvious, more distracting. There might just be one thought in the entire sky, but it seems to demand every last bit of our attention. The reason this lesson was so important for me, and I hope will be for you, was that I'd always assumed that I had to somehow create blue sky. It was under the impression that to experience headspace, I needed to make something happen. The truth is, we don't need to create anything. The blue sky is headspace, and it's always there. Or rather, here. This changed everything for me. Meditation was no longer about trying to create an artificial state of mind, which I imagined headspace was. Neither was it about trying to keep all the clouds at bay. It was more a case of setting up a deck chair in the garden and watching as the clouds rolled by. Sometimes the blue sky would peek through the clouds, which felt nice, and if I was able to sit there patiently and not get too engrossed in the clouds, then even more of the blue sky would start to appear. It was as if it had happened on its own, with no help from me whatsoever. Watching the clouds in this way gave me a perspective, a sense of space that I had not known in my meditation before. More than thought, it gave me the confidence to sit and rest my mind in its natural state, not trying, not doing, just being. Of course, it's all very well me telling you this, but until you experience it for yourself, it may not sound all that significant. But take a moment to imagine what it would be like to have that kind of freedom and space in your mind. Imagine what it would be like to be unconcerned with the volume or intensity of thoughts in your mind. Most of all, imagine what it would be like to have a place within your own mind which is always calm, always still, and always clear. A place that you can always return to, a sense of being at ease or at peace with whatever is happening in your life. Really great passage about the blue sky and the clouds and how we can compare that to our mind and our thoughts. So up next we have an exercise entitled Physical Sensations. Before we do this mindfulness exercise, I'm going to get myself another glass of Ménage à Trois. Cheers. My friend Dan is on Xbox. What's up, Dan? So, now we're going to do an exercise. So listen carefully and try and follow along. Put the book down for a couple of minutes and try this short exercise. We return here to the idea of being at peace with whatever is on your mind. Whereas last time you were focusing on sounds or visual objects, this time try focusing on a physical sensation. It can be the sensation of the body pressing down on the chair or bed beneath you, the soles of your feet against the floor, or even the sensation of your hands resting on the book. The advantage on focusing on physical sensations of touch like this is that it's very tangible, but you may well find that the mind still wanders a lot. So if you do experience a very busy mind or a strong emotion of some kind, remember the idea of the blue sky, the possibility that perhaps underneath all those thoughts and feelings, there might exist a place that is still, spacious, and clear. So each time you realize the mind has wandered off and you've become distracted, just effortlessly move the attention back to the physical sensation. Let's take a few deep breaths together and focus on some of the physical sensations that you're feeling around you. Make sure your eyes are closed when you do this, because it'll intensify that physical experience. Again, we're going to breathe in for 4 counts, hold our breath for 4 counts, exhale for 4 counts, and then hold for 4 counts. So let's begin. Let's inhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. Exhale. Hold. 2, 3, 4. 3, 4. 3, 4. 3, 4. 3, 4. 3, 4. 3, 4. 3, 4. How does that feel? Do you feel more relaxed? Do you feel more in tune with your mind and your body? Let's continue with the next passage called The Wild Horse. Sometime later, I found myself living in a much busier monastery, which served the needs of the local community and received a lot of visitors. We were still given many hours a day to meditate in a formal way, but the emphasis at this monastery was more on the practice of awareness in everyday life. In other words, the practice of mindfulness. Having previously had the luxury of moving seamlessly from one meditation session to the next, I'd grown accustomed to my mind settling quite quickly when I sat down to meditate. But now, the sessions were often sandwiched between other activities, such as gardening, cooking, cleaning, and paperwork. Often this involved working with others, having conversations and discussions about all sorts of things. Some of these conversations were monastic in nature, and others were, how shall I say, less monastic. What I discovered very quickly was that this type of interaction made for a very different type of meditation session afterwards. Rather than sitting down and the mind immediately setting as it had before, it was now very busy. Falling back into my old habits of trying to control the mind. Never underestimate the strength of this tendency. If my mind hadn't settled within 5 minutes or so, I started to resist the thoughts, and in resisting them, I created yet more thoughts. I then panic about the fact that I was creating more thoughts, and in doing so, create even more thoughts. I was fortunate enough to have a very experienced teacher on hand again, and so went to ask his advice. He was known for his warmth and often humorous teaching style, and rarely answered a question with a straightforward answer. In fact, he would often answer a question with another question. But when he did answer, lost my page. But when he did answer, it was almost always in the form of a story, of which, just like the previous teacher, he seemed to have an inexhaustible supply. I explained my difficulties as he sat listening, slowly nodding his head. "Have you ever seen a wild stallion broken in?" he asked. I shook my head. What did that have to do with anything? He seemed a little disappointed, but then I guess life on the Tibetan steppes as a child is somewhat different from growing up in a small English village. He continued to talk about these wild horses, which he said were very difficult to catch and even harder to tame. "Now imagine you grab hold of these horses and try to keep it in one place," he continued. I imagined standing next to the horse, holding on to it tightly with a rope. "Impossible!" he blurted out. "No man or woman can hold down a wild horse. It's too strong. Even if you got together with all of your friends, you'd never be able to hold it down in one place. This is not the way to tame a wild horse. When you first catch one of these horses," he continued, "you need to remember that they are used to running free. They're not used to standing still for a long time, or being forced against their will to stay in one place." I started to get a sense of where he might be going. "Your mind is like this wild horse when you sit to meditate. You can't expect it to stay still in one place all of a sudden, just because you're sitting there like a statue doing something called meditation. So when you sit down with this wild horse, this wild mind, you need to give it lots of room. Rather than trying to immediately focus on the object of meditation, give your mind some time to settle, to relax a little. What's the hurry? Again, he was right. I was rushing my meditation, thinking that somehow the next moment was more important than this one, still trying to get a certain state of mind. Quite what point I was trying to reach was not entirely clear. Instead, he suggested, approach your mind in the same way that these wild horses are broken. Imagine you're standing in the middle of a really big space, a large open field. Now the horse is on the end of the slack rope that you're holding onto, but it has all the space it needs. It doesn't feel as though it's being trapped or pinned down in any way. I imagined the horse running freely in the field. As I stood there, keeping a watchful eye on it, holding on loosely to the end of the rope. Now place one hand over the other, and very gently shorten the length of the rope by bringing it in a bit. Not by much, but just a little bit. He held his thumb and forefinger up, just half a centimeter between them, as if to emphasize the point. If you do this gently enough with a wild horse, it won't even notice the difference. It will still feel as though it has all the space in the world. Keep doing this, slowly bringing the horse closer, all the while keeping an eye on it, but giving it enough space to feel at ease and not too nervous. This made a lot of sense, and simply imagining the process made me feel more relaxed. So, he said, this is what you need to do with your mind when you sit down and find it's very busy. Take it slowly, be gentle, and give it all the space that it needs. Allow the horse to come to a natural place of rest where it feels happy, confident, relaxed, staying in one place. Sometimes it might struggle at first, but that's fine. Just loosen the rope again slightly and gently repeat the process. If you meditate in this way, then your mind will be very happy. Oops, it looks like my camera is frozen. Let me restart it. Apologize for the technical difficulties. And we're back. And we're back. Keep doing this, slowly bringing the horse closer, all the while keeping an eye on it, but giving it enough space to feel at ease and not too nervous. This made a lot of sense, and simply imagining the process made me feel a lot more relaxed. So, he said, this is what you need to do with your mind when you sit down and find it's very busy. Take it slowly, be gentle, and give it all the space that it needs. Why is my shit so blurry? Let me focus on the fire a bit better. There we go, that's a little better. I should maybe use more light next time. Yeah, more light next time. Allow the horse to come to a natural place of rest where it feels happy, confident, and relaxed staying in one place. Sometimes it might struggle at first, but that's fine. Just loosen the rope again slightly and gently repeat the process. If you meditate in this way, then your mind will be very happy, he said. Remembering this simple story will make a huge difference to your meditation. In fact, why not check out the letting go of effort animation on our YouTube channel or in the Headspace app. Plugging it with a advertisement at the end of their book passage. Okay. So that's going to wrap it up with our reading for today. I hope you enjoyed the passage on the sky, the road, and the wild horse. If you want to listen back and think about how those practices can improve your meditation, I encourage you to do so. Before we get out of here, we're going to do a few breathing exercises and a little bit of meditation ourselves. So let's get that going. I hope you've enjoyed the stream so far. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, make sure you just click a like down there, click where it says like, leave a comment, give me some feedback on the stream. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if you liked it. Let me know if you didn't like it. I'd love to hear some feedback and what you would want me to do in some upcoming streams and videos. This was my first ASMR quiet reading stream, so this was a bit of a test run. But I hope it is enjoyable and that it can bring people some calmness, some relaxation, and some help with their sleep. So again, we're going to end with some quick breathing exercises. So make sure you're relaxed and in a place where you're planted and still. Close your eyes. This time we're going to be taking a breath in for 6 counts, holding for 2 counts, exhaling for 6 counts, and holding for 2 counts. So let's try this together. Whenever you're ready, we're going to take a big inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2. 1, 2, inhale. 1, 2. Inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold. Exhale. Inhale. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. Alright, so that's going to end it for tonight. This is Gabey. Please like, subscribe to my pages if you want more content. Show me some love with a comment. It's been fun reading here and joining you tonight on this mindfulness and meditation journey. I really enjoyed doing this. This was a lot of fun and it felt really calm and relaxing. So I'm going to continue doing this kind of content and hopefully improving the quality in the future. So that maybe it's a little bit better for you. Maybe you can hear the content a little better, see what's going on a little bit better. I think I need to get a ring light or a better light. I put on a nice ambient light for this evening. But I think a little bright light to show my face and this area a little better might help the content of this stream. Just thinking out loud, sharing some thoughts. Hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you again for joining me, and I hope to see you on the next stream. Much love, blessings, peace, calm, and kindness your way. Have a wonderful night. Take care.